congressmen and women and senators who come from these suburban districts, who come from these industrial districts, who were saying that, we can't sell this back to our constituents. So I think this will have ramifications in the run-up to the midterms as well.
Well, viewers, let's go straight across and take stock of this story as we approach the top of 9 tonight, viewers. Very consequential decision has been taken by the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court, in a 6-3 ruling, has struck down Donald Trump's tariff tyranny, so to speak. What we're being told is that the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that the tariffs that were imposed by Donald Trump as he went about weaponizing trade are illegal. Not all of them, but a majority of them. And let me very quickly update you if you're just joining this big broadcast, because remember, this decision comes in the midst of protracted conversations between Delhi and DC over the Indo-US nuclear deal, over the Indo-US trade deal. And viewers, as you know, there is a signing ceremony expected to give concrete shape to this deal in the middle of March. A number of Indian top ministers and vice versa have been speaking to each other over the last 15 days or so, trying to work out the nitty-gritty of this deal so that this protracted conversation can be concluded in a manner that would be favorable to both sides. But largely there have been questions asked whether India had to surrender some of its interests, as some people have implied, because a gun was put to India's head, and that gun was a 50% tariff plus sanctions gun, so to speak, viewers. And India therefore had to come to the table and negotiate with Trump, and some people say not so favorable terms. What happens to that deal? Is that deal going to be iced? Has India's bargaining position dramatically improved? Will Delhi have leverage going forward? And what happens to all the money that has been realized by Donald Trump's administration on the back of the tariffs that he has imposed across the globe on goods that were being imported by American businesses and then sold to, of course, American consumers? Already I can tell you that the stock markets in America have reacted positively to this development. So it's Friday morning there in America right now, and the markets have opened, and all of them, at least till about 10 minutes back, seem to have suggested that they are in agreement and relieved that the Supreme Court has gone ahead and struck down Mr. Donald Trump's tariffs. The justices, says the Reuters copy, in a 6-3 ruling authored by conservative Chief Justice John Roberts, upheld a lower court's decision that the Republican president's use of this 1977 law exceeded his authority. Goes on to say the court ruled that the Trump administration's interpretation that the law at issue, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or the IEEPA, grants Trump the power he claims to impose tariffs, would intrude on the powers of Congress and violate a legal principle called the Major Questions Doctrine. So, viewers, for a variety of reasons, legal reasons, these tariffs have been ruled illegal. Now, let me bring in Zaka Jacob, my colleague. Zaka, break this down for us in its implications, because this is a major development and has huge implications for New Delhi.
Oh, absolutely. 100 countries were the ones that he had issued that executive order against for tariffs on April 2nd, Liberation Day. Then, because of the backlash from certain countries, he paused it for 3 months. And then finally, in July, he started announcing one by one deals with Europe, with South Korea, with Japan. India was the one country which had not struck a deal with the United States, first because of the 25% tariffs, and then an additional 25% tariffs for the import of Russian oil. Finally, in January, we managed to, after that conversation between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump, we finally managed to get an in-principle agreement where the 25% Russian oil tariffs would be taken off, and that executive order got signed earlier in February. And then he would reduce the first set of reciprocal tariffs from 25% to 18%. Now what has happened is, with the Supreme Court ruling, majority 6-3 judgment, the whole legal basis for imposition of tariffs has been taken off, which means the president either has to use another section of law, or he has to go back to the US Congress to try and rally up the numbers, to try and rally up the votes and get the US Congress to pass, under the same provisions of the Act, the IEEPA Act, the set of tariffs against 100+ countries. Now, that is going to be an extremely difficult political and legislative process, I suspect, because... Yeah, go on.
No, I didn't mean to cut you off, but we're being joined by Grant T. Harris, former Assistant Secretary of Commerce from the United States of America. Thank you very much, Mr. Harris. Both Zaka and I have questions for you. So we are going to ask you questions. Be patient, because I know that information is still trickling in, but we're going to try and understand the implications of all of this from you. Now, what happens next? We know that these tariffs have been ruled illegal. What can Trump do to perhaps challenge the Supreme Court or get things swung in his favor? Does he have options, and what are these options?
Thank you for having me. This is indeed a major development. One, it's very embarrassing for the administration and for President Trump, after leveraging these tariffs as both a threat and as a cudgel. And the Supreme Court has very clearly said that this statute is not available for the imposition of tariffs the way that this administration has sought to use it. There are options for the administration, and they have been making plans as a contingency to use other legal mechanisms to impose tariffs, and they've already taken some steps. There are other sections of U.S. trade laws and trade acts, including based on national security grounds. And so I believe that the administration, and as they publicly said, is able to use these other mechanisms in many ways, but those ones aren't as fast and they aren't as nimble. They can't be done to the same degree or have the same impact. It'll be cobbling together alternatives.
What happens to all of these deals that Trump has struck with Japan, with South Korea? The India legal framework is going to be signed, I believe, in the next few days. A team was scheduled to go to the U.S. Next week. Does all of that get thrown out the window?
Not necessarily, no. The administration can, of course, continue to enter into bilateral agreements and deals. What I think is important to recognize is that the Supreme Court decision is an important landmark. It's an important milestone on the tariff journey. It is not the end point or the destination. The Supreme Court has made a clear judgment about the use of this legal authority, which had factored so prominently in the use by President Trump. But President Trump does have other authorities, and in these bilateral conversations, the United States and India and other countries can, of course, agree in terms of what tariff rates should be and also to increase investment.
But the legal basis of these deals was this particular section of the IEEPA. And if the court is today saying that that legal basis is flawed or that legal basis is illegal, then what legal value do these deals have until such time that the president goes back and finds other provisions of this law that he can use to reimpose these tariffs?
There are other authorities that the president can use. And I think the key issue is that IEEPA was something that could be put into effect either through a threat or even just over the course of a number of hours. I know that when I worked in the White House, I was responsible for various situations that were affected by IEEPA, and you would declare a national emergency and you could do it very quickly. We didn't do it for tariffs at the time, but in other instances. These other tools for tariffs can take longer. There are more opportunities for input generally. But I think the core point is that this administration, this president, really prefers the use of tariffs as leverage in trying to reach bilateral and other agreements. I don't think that's going to stop.
Oh, I see. Oh, why do you say that? Because that was an instrument that he had weaponized to basically get foreign governments and others to do his bidding. So if that tool has been taken away from him by the Supreme Court, how does that continue on?
I think it's really important to separate the question of tariffs and his use of them from the use of this tool. This tool is a particular US statute that he had used in an unprecedented way, and the Supreme Court said no. There are other authorities, though, that the president can use. He has used Section 232, which also allows the president to negotiate agreements. He has said that there are other authorities, and his key team members, the Commerce Secretary, the U.S. Trade Representative, have said that there are other provisions, even some that have never been used or have rarely been used, that can be put into effect. So my bottom line is this. President Trump can continue to use tariffs as leverage. He will need to use other legal authorities. His team has already been thinking about this. They won't be as nimble or as quick, but we will have to see if the practical effect will be much different because he still does have tariff authorities.
Can I ask you, Mr. Harris, does this at least reduce his leverage?
I think that it's a big reputational blow. He had based a lot of policy decisions off of the use of this particular statute. You could tell in the statements from him and key lieutenants that they were nervous that a Supreme Court ruling would undercut their credibility on this. But at the end of the day, if they can use other authorities, they still have leverage in the use of tariffs. But it changes the game.
Well, just one final word. If he were to go to Congress, as the Supreme Court verdict suggests him to do, would you reckon there is political appetite both in the House and in the Senate to get this passed under the same section of IEPA?
I don't think that IEPA would be likely to be amended by this Congress to give him the authority that he thought he already had. I think he's more likely to rely on authorities that he claims are entirely under his prerogative, and it would be a difficult journey. The Supreme Court has made a pretty clear statement on their view of congressional prerogatives and what this one IEPA statute says. So the president, for the sake of time and his own authorities, is likely to fall back on tools he thinks he already has.
Grant Harris, stay on with us. I also want to introduce Ajay Dua, former Commerce Secretary, Government of India, Sushant Sareen, Senior Fellow of the ORF, P.K. Basu, an economist. I want to come back to you first, Mr. Ajay Dua. Thank you for speaking to us. I wanted to ask you, how do you see this development from an India perspective, from an India lens? Should India renegotiate? Should we stall for time? How does this change equations, if at all?
Rahul, thank you for having me in this discussion. I think this is an opportunity for India to review its current position, which seems to be to send a delegation to the United States early next week to work out, legally vet, by all accounts. To me, it appears it will be only, not a full-fledged agreement, but only about the low-hanging fruits. But even there, if the law as enunciated today by the Supreme Court is that the president does not have the powers to levy a tariff without the congressional approval, India would do well not to hurry into it, because this today he's President Trump, who's going to be the ultimate authority, whatever India signs with it. We are in his kind of a vision, clearly in his vision, is going to be batting from the position that I have just removed 25% penalty and I'm agreeable to 18% tariff. So somewhere around that is what the new tariffs should be in the agreement. But I think that itself is too high, considering that our average tariff on our exports to the US used to be 3 to 4% before President Trump came in I think buying time might be a good idea.
So buying time would be a good idea, which means that the legal team that was supposed to go next week, you're saying, they should maybe cancel those tickets and not head
Why not?
to
And
to.
why not?
Why not?
Why not? That will send a message which is appropriate in the context of the
so let's-
treatment which we've been getting from the United States.
It's a provocative thought that has been thrown up here by Mr. Dua. So, Zach, let me just quickly weave in another Indian analyst, someone who is not shy of being provocative on national TV, Sushant Sareen, and also, of course, we have with us PK Basu. Both of them are people who have defended India's strategic autonomy. Sushant Sareen, what should India do now? We're at a crossroads.
I think the Supreme Court in the United States has put not just Donald Trump and his administration in a pickle. I think they put the entire global economy in a pickle because this is going to be an uncertainty that is going to dog every single country, including the United States. Now, I don't necessarily agree with Mr. Dua simply because I think we should continue to negotiate with the Americans. We can probably push it a little further. But look, let us be very clear about something.
So that's all I
There
said.
are aspects to
I'm
this
not
whole
saying that it's not
negotiating.
negotiable.
There are two aspects to this whole thing. One is that uh, I'm sure the Trump administration, as was earlier being said on the show, will figure out other ways. Look, governments have multiple ways to do the same thing. They picked up one particular instrument that the Supreme Court has said you cannot carry out, levy tariffs, and the sheer capriciousness with which tariffs were being levied. Somebody made a statement, you said, okay, fine, now 200% duties on him. Somebody said Trump is the genius of the world, okay, only 15%. That capriciousness with which it was being done, probably that will end. But I'm sure the US government has plenty of other mechanisms to levy these tariffs. They'll figure out something. That's the thing with government. If you can't do one thing in one way, you can do it in another way. That is one. But I think from a global economic point of view, especially from a global trade perspective, if I was an exporter today, or I was somebody who was doing business with the United States, or I was a business in the United States, how would I deal with the rest of the world? I don't know. This is like a tin African dictatorship where one day you have one set of tariffs, the other day another regime comes and those tariffs are gone, something else is being imposed. Can you understand the kind of dislocation, disruption, and uncertainty that this injects into the global economic system? Nobody is clear anymore what the tariffs are, what they are not going to be. Will the companies get refunds of the tariffs they've already paid because this has been declared illegal? How does the whole system manage? How does the whole system play itself out? So I think forget about just the fact that how India is going to negotiate with the US. I think it's just
you want to bring in Mr. Harris on that question, that billion and billion dollar question?
So Scott Bessent says, and this is, I think, from just a few days ago, he says the total revenues through these tariffs that the U.S. Treasury has collected is $170 billion. What happens to those monies, Mr. Harris? I mean, does it still sit with the U.S. Treasury? Do they give it back? How does it work?
That is a great question. The Supreme Court did not clearly say what should happen with that money. And it is an open question because it's possible that the US government will slow roll this or will argue that it doesn't need to make certain returns. It's something that is going to continue to be litigated, and there will be a lot of discussion about going forward. And in addition to that, I do think very fair points have been raised about the on-again, off-again nature of the tariffs coming from the United States. It's really important to understand that there are other tariff authorities, and so tariffs can still be threatened, they can still be put in place. Other tariffs that already are in place will not be affected. So this is an enormous ruling. It is a huge blow to the use of this legal authority. There is severe lack of clarity as to what will happen with the money already collected. But I still think it's in the strong interest of India and other countries to continue to think about what kind of negotiations and what sort of tariff posture and investment posture suits the bilateral relationship, because this does not mean that tariffs will go away.
You know, one interesting sidelight, I don't know what kind of bearing this will have on that decision, but basically the nub of today's Supreme Court verdict is the power to authorize these tariffs is with the US Congress, not with the US President. As per US law,
Correct.
the power to declare war is also with the US Congress, not with the US President.
True.
So all this war clouds around Iran, whether or not this will be a deterrent to that decision, we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, Suhail Seth, thank you for joining.
So I think three things have happened. Number one, you have finally an absolutely weakened president whose bluster has been called out by the Supreme Court. A person who thought he could get away but isn't going to get away. Having said that, he is a trickster beyond par. So I won't put it past him to use executive authority to impose other trade tariffs through the back door. And those options are available to him. Number three, his entire plank of both coming to power, running for office, term 2, and talking about America and affordability was built on the infusion of the money that was coming in qua tariffs. So that's gone out of the window. And now, when you're approaching midterm polls, it's an extremely high task and a tightrope that he must walk in order to prove A, that I will make America affordable, which isn't happening. Number two, that I'm the president who's in control, because he certainly isn't. The most damning of this all, Zaka and Rahul, is what the Supreme Court has alluded to in so many words. This is the abuse of office. And that, to my mind, is a stinging indictment of Donald J. Trump's second term. And I don't think he's going to live that one down. But knowing the person that he is, knowing that he's full of bluster and that he will wash away, the sins that have been bestowed upon him, I wouldn't put it past him to now start abusing the Supreme Court like he did when the Supreme Court laid a decision on this whole immigrant and migration issue, where he said that the Supreme Court is against the benefits accrued to America. So, this is a game that's going to play out. I wouldn't rush to change anything with this person. You never know where the ball will fall. I would still say it's early days. The government has said in a statement, which I just saw on Bloomberg, that they will appeal the decision. So this is going to play out in the Supreme Court for a while. We really don't know what's going to happen. So let's not count our chickens before Trump begins to hatch them.
One other point, Rahul, if I may, is
of course.
Trump goes to China in April. It's already an announced visit.
Correct.
And it's the only big country with which America has not had a trade deal yet. And he can't afford to go to China with a weak hand or appear weak. So he will do something between now and that April visit to try and circumvent
Well,
this
the New York
judgment.
Times is reporting, and let me just quickly put this out there and get a reaction also from Mr. Harris, from other panelists, including Suhail Seth, who, by the way, is in New York right now as we speak. Mr. Harris, what we're being told, the New York Times is quoting White House having said that it plans to replace the IEEPA tariffs with other duties, using more clear-cut authorities. However, those legal provisions usually require the U.S. Trade Representative to undertake an investigation and only apply to certain sectors. President Trump has been using the emergency tariffs as a cudgel against any country that displeases him for any reason, and goes on to sort of list some of those countries. Losing the authority deprives Trump of a powerful point of leverage and a tool for retaliation. And that's the point that we were making, weren't we, a short while back? So that's the fundamental issue here. In India, New Delhi is going to look at how much this chips away at Trump's authority to dictate terms, bully his allies.
It makes Modi look very good.
Yeah,
It makes our foreign policy, it makes Prime Minister Modi look very good, because
that is,
we
of course,
did not succumb, we did not crawl when we were asked to walk, and we've kept all our cards, all our options open. But there's only one issue, Rahul, with the comment that you made. Both and Zaka talked about China. The thing is that today you have, for the first time, almost a year and a month later, an absolutely weakened Donald J. Trump, who can't manage this. But remember, he does have the authority, and his trade representative is a slimy character himself. So I wouldn't put it past them to effect duties in the garb of tariffs and continue to impose those on certain sectors. But one last point, the hand that he played incorrectly was if he had imposed sectoral tariffs and not country tariffs, it would have been a different ballgame. He is seen as taking revenge on nations rather than looking at sectors which had impacted American consumerism. That was the fundamental mistake that he made.
So we have with us, and we are fortunate to do so, the former Assistant Secretary of Commerce, Mr. Harris. Mr. Harris, how do you interpret these remarks? First, the New York Times report, Suhail Seth, who's a panelist here, his remarks, and of course what the previous panelist was saying, Mr. Serene.
I think it is incredibly important to be clear about what the Supreme Court is saying. They are saying that the use of the IEEPA statute, it is a particular legal authority, is not meant for tariffs, and that the tariffs that President Trump claimed would be levied under IEEPA are not to be, and that is not consistent with the statute. That is not the same thing as saying that all tariffs are illegal or that the president has no authority to impose tariffs. He has Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974, Section 201 of that Trade Act, Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act. I can go on to other authorities. Some of them have different requirements for an agency to make a finding. Some of them are used in different ways. There are other sections that haven't been used before, but that his administration officials have said that he can use. So I think we really need to be clear. Tariffs are not going away in terms of President Trump's economic and foreign policy. How they use the legal authorities will need to shift, even as they continue to litigate this particular authority.
So this is a professor of tax law at the UCLA School of Law. She says the strength of the president's tariff cudgel has been diminished. Governments abroad and businesses at home can both expect a somewhat less mercurial American tariff process. I think that sums it up well.
Which would calm, of course, Indian market sentiments too, and perhaps have a knock-on effect. Suhail Seth, do you think, and Sushant Serene, how do you interpret this statement?
My feeling is that the markets in America will have a level of spooking. You know, I don't track the stock market. I'm not as wealthy as any of you. So I really have no idea what the stock market is.
You're talking to a couple of journalists here, my dear friend, at a time when journalism is going through a crisis, not just of confidence.
And Sushant is a policy wonk, so he's even more wealthy than all of us put together. I really don't know what's happening in the markets, but it's worth tracking what's happening. Zaka talked about China. It may be worth our while to track what's happening on the Hang Seng, what's happening with the off-market timings in China, Hong Kong, Singapore. That would give you an indicator. So I don't know what's happening on Wall Street. I haven't tracked it.
The NASDAQ is up about half a percent, and the Dow Jones is up about 0.3%. So it's positive. I think if you were to ask...
it's positive.
Yeah. The NASDAQ is up 0.5%, and the Dow Jones is up about 0.35%, which means the markets are giving a thumbs up to this decision, this verdict.
Which means the markets are technically relieved that Donald Trump does not have unchecked, rule of law in the manner in which he moves around. So I think that's a great sign.
Spencer Critchley, author and journalist, also here with us. Mr. Harris, stay on. Sushant Serene, I want to come back to you right after and bring in Mr. Critchley. Mr. Critchley, how do you review this? What is the next step? Has Donald Trump's leverage, his cudgel, as some people are calling it, diminished?
Yes, I think that what's most important about this is that it's a victory for the rule of law and therefore a rule of democracy. I'm an opponent of Trump's tariffs, as are most people who have to run businesses, and as are the overwhelming majority of economists, especially those who understand international trade. But I think that that is actually secondary. Whether or not one supports the policy is a distant second to preserving the constitutional order that's the foundation of our democracy. And for Trump to just unilaterally seize the power to impose tariffs at his whim is a serious blow to the constitutional order. And it's a relief that this Supreme Court, which has so often sided with President Trump, often seeming to bend for political reasons, has not been willing to go this far.
Interestingly, the tariffs which are on steel and aluminum, which are under a separate provision of this law, they have been upheld by the Supreme Court. So can Mr. Trump and his allies use other provisions of this law or other laws to reimpose some of these sanctions, but by a different name, these tariffs, but by a different name?
Yes, I'm sure they'll try. And I think, as one of your guests was just saying, there are other pieces of law dating back decades that the White House has already said they're going to try to resort to. I think that the arguments become increasingly technical. I'm not an expert in this area, but I think that they're all overridden by the clear language of the Constitution, which explicitly gives the power of the purse, including taxes and tariffs, to the Congress. The American Revolution, after all, was fought first of all over the unilateral imposition of taxes on the American colonists by King George III. And it was not just that they didn't want to pay the money, it's that they objected to having no representation in that matter. The famous slogan was "Taxation without representation is fundamentally unjust," and they saw it as unjust under the rights of English subjects back, hundreds of years ago, according to English common law that had evolved since Magna Carta.
Right.
It's the foundation of the country that we don't have a king who can unilaterally decide to raise money from people.
Yes, and Mr. Critchley, what you're saying is being sort of echoed by Gavin Newsom, and I just want to bring in Sushant Sareen too, because this also sort of restricts Trump's political bluster a little bit, his political remit, so to speak, because look at the way his opponent has sort of framed this. He says, even Donald Trump's Supreme Court agrees. His tax on the American people is illegal. So he's framed it as an imposition on the American people that they should be relieved by this decision. A huge win for families and small businesses across the country who have been suffering under this man's ego, trying to influence public opinion. And we know that the midterms are coming up, Sushant Sareen, that could also change equations in the US Congress and beyond.
Let's not predict what will happen in elections, because sometimes a decision like this can actually work in Trump's favor, because his core constituency can turn around and say, well, the Supreme Court is being obstructionist. Trump is trying to make America great again. Supreme Court is with the liberals, etc., etc. So you don't know how this will play out. I agree that, look, fundamentally, a tariff is a tax that you are imposing on your own country. And if it falls foul of, the constitutional provisions, then yes, of course, the courts will strike it down. But the problem also is that, look, I think we need to recognize something, Rahul, and I'm going to say something which is very controversial, and I hope people take it in the right spirit. I think I can talk about India, and perhaps I can talk about the United States. In India, the Prime Minister of India, for example, has his powers circumscribed by a whole lot of checks and balances, and yet enjoys powers or can exercise power incongruent in any democracy. And the same thing applies in the United States. Now, how Trump decides he's going to exercise his powers, and what we have seen so far is that within the Republican Party, within the American system, whether it be the tech giants, the billionaires, you name those people, we've seen the entire checks and balances thing collapse until the Supreme Court decision. There was no one really willing to stand up, or who could really stand up to Donald Trump and challenge him. And all those checks and balances that we've all seen how the American system operates simply collapsed. Nobody was ready. The media collapsed. Most of the channels collapsed. Nobody was willing to answer him. There was an institutional takeover. So let us remember that if this does restrain Trump and his capriciousness, I think the Americans will be better off for it. But whether it does, or does he double down on what he has been doing already, I think we'll get to know in a couple of days. Finally, don't look at the markets. Because look, if the markets went up by 3, 4, 5% as a result of this decision, then I would say, yes, it has had a significant impact on the markets. But maybe a 0.2%, 0.5%, I'll hold judgment on that for now.
Yeah, so I mean, look, the markets are not necessarily a reflection of the real economy. I think there are couple of political points that need to be stressed. One, of course, for India, I think this would mean a pause till Donald Trump and his administration can figure out what other levers of the law they can use to try and bring back these tariffs, perhaps under a different provision, perhaps under a different name. But for now, I think as far as the India-US trade framework deal is concerned, at least the immediate plan of sending a legal team next week, and then the US trade representative was supposed to come here in the middle of March and sign that legal agreement, the interim trade framework agreement, the timelines of that could certainly get pushed a bit. But like I said, the other big political consideration for Trump is that he has declared he's going to China in April. He will not want to go to China with a weak hand. He will have to sort this issue out before he goes to Beijing, because the only other big country with which the US has not struck a trade deal is China. And the only other country which in the last year of these tariffs has pushed back twice against the imposition of these tariffs, first in April with the bond yields going up, and secondly in October with the curbs on the rare earths, is China. So he will be very, very mindful of that. Rahul.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, look, I mean, this has opened a whole new can of worms, and I think that India needs to calibrate. What do you say, Suhail Seth? Do you think India sort of needs to now maybe take their foot off that accelerator because Trump's foot is off their jugular? Has the time come perhaps to sort of say, okay, let's be in a hurry now. Let's push back just a little bit more.
See, when a person decides to kill himself, you don't come in the way in deciding which method he should use. I think we should just wait, see how this whole thing unravels. There's a lot. See, my worry is that if we say, oh, see, Trump is screwed, blah, 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 and something goes wrong, we'll again be at the start line. My advice is do nothing, say nothing. It's an American issue. It's an American democracy issue. It's an American legal issue. Let them sort it out. We should do nothing and certainly say nothing. Because the moment we say something, it could go against us. And right now, till now, we've adopted a great position that you don't have to respond to everything that Donald Trump says. And that has stood us in good stead. You don't get into a fight with a pig. You get dirty and the pig loves it. We should just stay far away. Let them sort it out. And then let's see where things actually head.
Okay, well, let me just very quickly, for the sake of viewers who are just tuning in, give you a quick update. At 9:30, viewers, we can break and confirm that the Supreme Court has scrapped Trump's taxes and the tariffs that he has imposed across the globe on countries who he thinks are not playing by the rules that have been set by him. So that's the big breaking news. There are several implications.
Yes.
Obviously, this is not the final word, because even if they've been struck down, the refund disputes and fresh litigation could drag on for months or even years. I think that's the point that Zaka has also been making. Yes, there are refund battles ahead. The administration may resist cash refunds, offer credits instead, or attempt retroactive tariff fixes. There are several instrumentalities it could invoke. There's going to be growing political pressure on Donald Trump. Importers perhaps seeking refunds could face regulatory friction or public pressure to back off claims. So there are a whole bunch of scenarios, which also have implications for us, Zach. As you know, India could recalibrate its negotiation tactics. And I think that's something that perhaps will come into play. I think Sushant Srin is raising his hand. Yes, you want to make a point?
Yeah, Rahul, my point is that, we've been negotiating a trade deal with the Americans forever. And it's been postponed forever. And finally, I think the one good thing, if at all I can call it a blessing in disguise, the Trump tariffs did was that it concentrated our minds and we went ahead and finally finalized whatever the framework is, and we are expecting some kind of a deal by, say, next month. And I don't think we should turn back the clock. Okay. To the
Sushant, give me a second. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Paul Strauss is a U.S. Senator. He's now joining us. Senator, your first comments on the U.S. Supreme Court this morning in the U.S. Striking down the president's tariffs under this IEEPA. What is your first reaction to that?
Well, I think the first reaction is we are glad to see that the Supreme Court is willing to stand up to Donald Trump, at least on some issues. They're weighing in to protect the American economy and the American taxpayer. We've been very disappointed that prior to now, they have let the Trump administration run roughshod over Americans' rights. So, at a minimum, from a domestic point of view, it's good to see some independence from the court, even if it's on a narrow issue that basically supports conservative political principles. It's helpful to show that there's at least some checks on President Trump's power that the court is willing to impose.
What if the Trump administration brings the same set of tariffs through another provision of the law or uses other instruments that are available at the president's disposal to bring back the tariffs in another name, form, or shape?
Well, I suspect it'll go back to litigation. It may end up again before the Supreme Court. This is a very unpredictable administration. They don't follow the traditional rules and norms, and they're capable of numerous distractions on so many issues. There are a lot of domestic issues that they want to focus attention away from. Certainly the continued fallout from the Epstein files, continued problems with our economy, resentment in the United States about immigration enforcement. And so I wouldn't put anything past this administration. But the 6-3 majority is pretty clear as to where the Supreme Court is going to go on this. But it is true that this decision only looks at the specific law Trump tried to claim the tariff authority on. It was supposed to be an emergency law. The presidents that have used it have done so only under very specific circumstances. And it is not a broad delegation of taxing authority from the Congress to the United States. So, first, the president's going to have to get through Congress again that may be emboldened, we hope, to reassert their power in the legislative branch and provide some checks and balances against the executives. We have not seen that with this Republican-controlled Congress. They have let Donald Trump do whatever crazy ideas he wants. This may be a change that will embolden Congress to take back their rightful constitutional authority.
Do you think there is political appetite in this, as you said, Republican-controlled Congress, to give the president the authority to reimpose these tariffs? Or is there pressure even in the Republican Party, particularly from suburban districts, industrial districts, etc., on those House and Senate members to not go with these tariffs because it's hurting their constituents?
It is, and we've already seen a few Republicans in the House of Representatives go against the president and block the Canadian tariffs. We know that there's been some resistance in the Senate to that. So I don't think that Congress is going to overrule and surrender the authority that the Supreme Court has declared that they rightfully have and not the executive branch. Again, this has been a year and an administration where conventional wisdom has been not particularly helpful in predicting what this sometimes very irrational administration of ours has been doing. So anybody that attempts to make a habit of predicting the behavior of Trump or the Trump administration is not going to have a good track record. It remains to be seen what kind of stunt they may try. But the Supreme Court spoke clearly and with a firm majority. With the Chief Justice authoring the decision, I would be surprised if they tried to do things in the same way.
All right, Paul Strauss, thank you very much for joining us. Yeah, Rahul.
Yeah, let's go straight across to Michael Yoshida. I think he's joining us. He's, of course, CNN correspondent there with us. Thank you, Michael Yoshida, for joining us. What are the Trump administration's next steps? What options do they have?
Yeah, so that's the big question right now. Obviously, this ruling monumental for this second term of President Trump, striking down this major linchpin framework for everything he's been doing economically. Now, we did hear briefly from the president calling this a disgrace, but when you talk about those next steps, this is something from those we've heard from that this, to a certain extent, maybe was expected, this ruling. There was some reading of the tea leaves, if you will, based on the way the arguments went when this was before the Supreme Court last year, and that even hearing from some of the attorneys after that, maybe they knew where this may have been heading. to this point today, and that there have potentially been other things the administration has now been looking into. Obviously, that will need to be flushed out as we move forward. Obviously, this just came down a short time ago. We are waiting to hear, obviously, more from the White House on their next steps, because, again, this is such a linchpin to everything that he has been doing.
Michael Yoshida, just stay on with me. I need to go across to Jeffrey Sachs, who's just tuned in. Thank you, Jeffrey Sachs, for speaking with us this evening. Very consequential evening. How do you see this scenario unfold? What does this mean now for countries such as India, who are sitting miles across and are negotiating trade deals with Trump? Give us the overview.
Well, rip up the so-called trade deal. It's there's no point to it anymore. Trump did not have the authority to threaten India. He did not have the authority to impose tariffs on India. He did not have the authority to put penalties on India. All of it was unconstitutional, in violation of the law. Rip it up. There's nothing there.
Zaka.
Professor Sachs, the Supreme Court verdict has taken a very narrow view. There's a particular section of the IEPA which they say the president does not have the power or the authority to impose, but there are other instruments where the president can reimpose these tariffs. Do you think he will do that, or he just give up on this tariffs, because it's been a signature policy of his in the second term?
Well, I don't think it's a narrow opinion. It's actually quite a bold, clear opinion. It goes back to the American Revolutionary War, which was a war about taxation without representation. It said that the U.S. Constitution therefore put the authority of government revenues, including tariffs, into the hands of the representatives of the people in Article 1 of our Constitution. It's not a narrow reading. It's not a reading about the legislative language. It's a reading about the grab for power by the executive branch on something that does not belong to the executive branch. Well, will Trump try something else? Most likely, but he will also fail. But the man is a wrecking ball, no question. I'm just advising India, as I've been saying for a year, this is baloney. There was never the legality for this. This has been one-person rule in the United States. It's a nonsense. And if he tries something else, it'll be a nonsense too, because the ability to impose tariffs on India belongs with the U.S. Congress, not with Donald Trump.
So you're saying your advice to India right now would be, and I believe that a negotiating team was supposed to leave on Monday to the U.S. to vet the legal framework for this trade deal between India and the U.S. Your advice to them would be to cancel their tickets and sit tight.
Absolutely. Take a break, read the opinion, study it, think about all of this, listen to the rest of the world, and then take a trip. Absolutely do not act right now on something that has just been voided.
Yeah, okay. Just 1 second before I come out to you, Suhail, I just wanted to ask a question of Mr. Sachs on this point. Mr. Sachs, we're being told that there are other instrumentalities that Trump can lean on, actually, and that he could still instigate pressure on countries. That basically gives him leverage, doesn't it?
Trump thinks that he's a New York real estate developer that can use threats as he likes to bully people into agreements. And he's been doing that for a year. But that's not how our system of government is designed. Mm-hmm. And today, the Supreme Court said it quite clearly. It's actually a strong opinion. It is not a technical opinion. It is a strong constitutional opinion that this is an unconstitutional grab for power. Does Trump have other instruments of bullying? Yes. But what do you do with bullies? Do you just give in, or do you say stop bullying?
Never.
My view is you say stop the bullying. This is not acceptable.
But do you see him backing off in an election year, midterm elections? He's already quite unpopular. His ratings are quite down. Do you see him backing down on something like this?
Right.
No. No, I don't see him backing down.
It's Michael. Wondering if we're clear.
He's not a nice man. He's not backing down, but he doesn't have the authority. So it means that India doesn't have to back down. That's what it means. It means that other countries don't have to back down.
See, Rahul, a bully is essentially a coward. That's what Donald Trump genuinely is. He's a coward who has abused his office and threatened, to my mind, the economy of America. Because here's what's going to happen. And, you know, there's no one more eminent and more reasoned than Jeffrey on this program. Three things are going to happen. If you have to give back refunds, you are staring at a possible budget deficit, which means you will have a shortfall in the US budget. What does that do? It increases your debt issuance. It increases inflation. I mean, this man is jeopardizing all of America and threatening the American citizen at the cost of his goddamn ego. When you have an idiot in office, this is what happens. And when you have an idiot who's surrounded by a bunch of idiots, it happens even more. Can you imagine? You have Howard Lutnick, who supposedly ran Cantor Fitzgerald, advising him. An investment banker only thinks about one thing: exit. They never think about the long term. These are the people who are running America. I mean, I'm not saying this to flatter Jeffrey, and I remember meeting Jeffrey earlier last year in Delhi. You need people who will give you advice which is sagacious, neutral, and reasoned. For yes men, you need to go to an amusement park. The White House has been turned into an amusement park today. And the jokers are in it. The circus is being watched around the world. And the pawns are the American people.
So let me ask you, Jeffrey Sachs.
I told you this at the beginning of the program. India should not back down.
Okay, are you surprised that the markets haven't sort of reacted in a way that seems to be more welcoming of this decision, and that there is just incremental sort of gains on both the NASDAQ and the Dow?
I haven't even had time to look at the markets, frankly, but I don't think you're going to read from the markets the import of this. Mr. Lutnick, by the way, seemed to have time to think about Epstein as well. So this is a gang that should not be anywhere close to power. This is the basic point, and it's true. It's important. It is hurting us in the United States very badly, but it's hurting the whole world, because it is reckless bullying. And I have to add, it has made no sense, even from America's point of view, even from a narrow point of view of so-called American interests, anything that Trump has been doing. It's been economic illiteracy from the first moment. And now it's absolutely true. There will be hundreds of billions of dollars claimed for the budget, which in any event was going to be 7% of GDP deficit. All of that goes away this morning. So this is a very consequential ruling. But for India, take a deep breath, take a pause, rip up the trade agreement. You'll have a chance to come back to all of these issues later.
Well,
Follow Buddhism. Follow Buddhism.
Okay.
Say nothing, do nothing, and think of nothing.
We might have to do
because
something.
Whatever you do,
we may say nothing.
No, you don't do anything. At times, it is best to do nothing.
Okay, we'll
when
just say
a
that
person like
Indigo,
Donald Trump does anything, he's destructive.
the Indigo
we
flight,
don't need to do anything.
The Indigo flight to New York or DC didn't take off on Monday morning. That's what we can say, and probably be believed. But let me just bring in Harris, Mr. Harris in there. Jeffrey Sachs believes this is the death knell. You have a slightly different view. Can you elucidate on this? Are we being a bit too triumphal?
I think as we've been trying to tease out in this conversation, we really need to focus on the specifics of the Supreme Court decision. They looked at one legal authority and one tool. The president had read into this tool emergency powers that didn't exist, according to the Supreme Court. And so on Liberation Day, quote unquote, as I see the graphics of the president with this grand placard of all of these tariffs, those tariffs go away because this legal authority is not for use for tariffs. However, Congress has already granted the president other legal authorities to use for tariffs. Each of them have their own idiosyncrasies, timelines, use. Not all US tariffs are gone based on this ruling. There are other sources of tariffs. So the president still has the means to make threats, to impose tariffs. Not all tariffs are gone. That's not to say anything about the monumental nature of this ruling and its importance, but we can't conflate all tariffs into this one ruling or one legal authority.
Jeffrey Sachs, your comment on that. There are other sources of tariffs, and that's what we were talking about just a short while back.
Yes, it's true. This is absolutely true. But Trump was a one-person wrecking ball. One morning it was 25%, then it was 50%, then it was 18%. All of that nonsense is absolutely gone. Gone. Because it was blatantly illegal and unconstitutional and stupid, by the way. We can add that too. Thank you. I'm going to have to depart right now, but I'm glad that everyone can save themselves a long trip next Monday morning, and take a pause and find out really what all of this means. It's going to take probably days and weeks to assess, but it's a big deal because the emperor with no clothes has been called out.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. It's been an enlightening conversation. Thank you, Zaka. Thank you, Sohail Seth. Thank you, Mr. Harris and Jeffrey Sachs. Thank you for joining us this evening. That was a big, monumental breaking news, and we've brought you exhaustive coverage and covered pretty much every aspect of this. We'll be back in a short while. Don't go away.
Let me begin with the Congress. Ms. Acharya, is it that the Congress is not making it rather easy for every...
Huge development this, which has ramifications across the globe. The US Supreme Court has just ruled that Trump's invocation of the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, which was the legal basis through which he used these tariffs, imposed tariffs across all of America's trading partners, it has ruled that was illegal, that in this context, Trump could not invoke this 1977 law called the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, which is a presidential act that was brought in when Jimmy Carter was president. He's used a particular section in this IEEPA to justify the imposition of tariffs. Remember, he announced his tariffs on the 2nd of April on Liberation Day. It was paused for 3 months. And then from the end of July, he announced a series of deals with a host of countries, starting with the UK in May, and then, of course, eventually countries like Japan, South Korea, the European Union. India's was one of the last deals to be struck, and that happened just a few weeks ago. It happened in the last week of January, where India's rate was brought down from 50% to 18%. Now, all of that is history because the Supreme Court of the United States, all judges have sat in on this judgment, and by majority, they have ruled